I've lost count of how many times I've heard coaches say, I love coaching, but I do not know how to sell. That's just a domain that I am not comfortable with. I do not know how to sell. And I would really ask you to begin to question that thought that you don't know how to sell. Because selling is no different than just trying to convince someone. I'm not talking about beating someone over the head with something. But another word is enroll. Enroll someone into your ideas. And whether you're selling carpets or refrigerators or cars or whatever, coaching programs, every single one of us has had the experience of trying to convince someone or enroll someone into their ideas or their opinions, right? So just think about when you fell in love, right? Because we've used this metaphor throughout this program. Whenever you fall in love and you go back and you tell your friends about this wonderful person that you're in love with, you have no problem. They pick up that energy. They pick up your conviction about why you're in love. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is just share something that happened to me many years ago when I was 19 years old, actually. And about it was my first experience, one of the first experiences I've had in my young life back then of trying to convince someone of something. So like I said, I was 19 years old and I had been traveling overland with my boyfriend for about 4 or 5 months from London. And the whole aim was to get to Australia. Yeah. Okay. So we did a lot of mostly overland hitchhiking, little buses and trains here and there. But we finally landed in Singapore. And to cut a long story short, back then, I'm talking about in the mid 70s, when you arrived in a place like Singapore, you would have to, they didn't allow you, we didn't know this until we got there actually, but they didn't allow you to come actually into the city unless they had proof that you had an air ticket. You had to have an air ticket to get out, right? Or you had to show them that you had a train ticket that was going to lead to an air ticket. They were very, very strict. And just as an aside, to show you how strict they were, they didn't want any guys coming in with hair that was below their chin line. And so they actually had a barber set up at the train station. They cut my boyfriend's hair so as to let him in. That's just how strict they were in those days. But anyway, that's an aside. So anyway, we come through customs and they said, sorry, you cannot stay in Singapore because you do not have a ticket to Australia, which is where we told them we were heading there, because we had friends who had emigrated to Australia in northern Queensland. And so they said, we're going to give you 3 days to sort it out, but you have to go to the British Embassy to do that. And so off we go to the British consulate. And we were pretty shabby. We were from traveling. I think we had 2 changes of clothes and we looked pretty tired and shabby. And I remember sitting in the office, the woman there that was the officer, an embassy officer who interviewed us. And she said, you're going to have to, we'll give you the money to go back to England. We'll fly you back to England. And then we'll impound your passport so that you can pay us back. But that's all we can do. And I remember feeling so crushed at that. Yeah, it was good of them to offer us the money to fly home, but that was the last thing I wanted to do. And I sat there in that chair and I remember it distinctly. I remember feeling so crushed. And I just, I was a young, inexperienced girl. I was just not very savvy about life or about people or about embassies. It freaked me out just to be in an embassy. But I distinctly remember that day sitting in that office and looking at her and saying, please don't send me back. I can't go back to England. I left England because I had no education. My family were poor working class people. There was no future there for me. At least that's how I perceived it. There was no life. There was no promise of a life there for me, which is why I really want to get to Australia. I have friends there, and there is hope for me there to make something of my life, something different, right? If not, I just didn't want to go back. If I went back to England, I'll end up working in some little shop or office and get married and have a couple of kids. And, you know, I just didn't see a future there. I don't see a future there for myself. Please send me to Australia. I will pay you double. I'll pay you double if you send me to Australia. And Australia was a lot cheaper as well. So I pleaded my case, and I had tears streaming down. The thought, I felt so destitute. We left the office. She said, well, you come back in 24 hours, we'll have our decision for you. Either way, we'll have a ticket for you. So I left that office feeling, oh, what can I do? I've said my piece, you know? So we went off and came back 24 hours later, sat down in the office. She handed Ray and I, that's my boyfriend, 2 tickets, airline tickets. We opened them up, and they were tickets to Australia. And I just get so emotional just thinking about it, because it just meant so much to me. And that energy, that conviction touched her on some level, right? Just the way it touched me, just the way I felt. So it was such a compelling thing for me to pursue, to go on to Australia. So she handed us tickets to Townsville, Queensland, Australia, where our friends were living. And then she said, here, she handed us another check. And she said, here's a check, and you pay us back. We impound your passports in Australia. As soon as you get there, you get a job, pay us back, and then you're free. And she says, here's another check. Go buy some decent clothes, because we were so disheveled. She says, you want to keep, you know, we're British. We want to look good when we arrive in Australia. Go figure, right? So the point I want to get across here, guys, is that you may never have sold anything like an item. You may never have been hired as a salesperson. Doesn't matter. You don't need any technique. You don't need any training in what to say, how to say it. There's no snappy, snippy, you know, clever little salesy thing that you can do. What you can do, all you need, is sincerity, conviction, and connection with what it is you're selling. And if you don't have that, you won't sell anything. You may sell a few things, but that's what selling is. It's enrolling people into your idea, into this thing that you are saying is going to make their life different, right? That's what it is. And it's not about, you know, because when you get into this whole thing about what am I going to say, how do I look, whatever, that's all in that head bubble. It's all that thinking bubble. And that's not where you want to be. You want to bring it down into the body, just like I did all those years ago. I let my feelings, I felt my feelings. I was in my body when I spoke to that woman, and it worked. She picked up on it. She picked up on the sincerity. She picked up on how authentic I was. She picked up on the dream I had, and it changed everything. So hopefully that will help you drop this idea that, oh, I'm not a seller. Yes, you are.